Now, every now and then, the decades-long Middle East conflict reignites with Israel and the Palestinians trading blame as to who's at fault. But as the regional conflict escalates, so too does the involvement of the international community. And global protests are now taking place amidst the latest flare-up. Our international affairs correspondent Batya Leventhal has the scoop. Take a look.
There is no such thing as a fair fight in war. The same could be said for international media coverage and the stance of the global community, as is the case in the latest escalation between Israel and Gaza.
Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory.
There have been seriously disproportionate attacks on Gaza, and they have led to the martyrdom of hundreds of thousands of people.
World leaders, politicians, celebrities joining in and flaming the conflict from afar, sparking a global protest movement. On the one side, Armenia, Turkey, Jordan, France, Germany, Kenya, South Africa, the United States, and the United Kingdom.
We want the whole world to know what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people. It is genocide. It is not conflict or a war. They are being massacred.
With many counter-protests taking place in Italy, Canada, and the US.
They're all hiding in those shelters. It's impossible to live under all these missiles. They are constantly coming at them without any reason. They are civilians, for God's sake.
Many of the demonstrations across Europe turned violent. Some could even be considered openly anti-Semitic.
Many of us are angry, upset, heartbroken by the events in Israel, the West Bank and the Gaza. That's no excuse, though, for anti-Semitism.
The emotion-filled opinions from thousands of miles away are doing little to calm tensions. In fact, they are simply adding fuel to an extremely explosive conflict. Calls for a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza are growing. Perhaps it should also be extended to the online war.
All right, well, today, yet again, Washington, D.C. is seeing another massive pro-Palestinian protest against Israel. Just 2 days ago, the American city saw hundreds of protesters march from the Washington Monument to the U.S. Capitol building to demonstrate against Israel's treatment of the Palestinian people and what they say is an inadequate response from the United States. Well, we have our correspondent Omar Al-Muqdad joining us right now from the scene of the latest protest in Washington, D.C. So, Omar, who are the people that we're seeing joining in on this protest today, and how many people are actually out there?
Thank you, Natasha. What we are witnessing here is a gathering of tens of people, actually. I believe the estimation is over 200, just in front of the Israeli embassy here, demanding the end of the Israeli military campaign against Gaza and to end the siege of Gaza. And they are also standing in solidarity with the Palestinians. I was speaking to some of these protesters earlier, and what they are seeing here is the crimes against the humanity that's being committed by the Israeli forces against the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and there is no equivalency here, as one of them stated. As you can see, the people are still coming to the embassy here to demonstrate that, and this is a part of a much larger demonstrations that took place in different American cities in New York, Chicago, and elsewhere. And we are expecting this to grow up bigger as the Israeli military campaign continue in Gaza. Natasha?
Are people distinguishing Hamas from the greater Palestinian public? Is there any understanding of the varying conflicts happening within the region right now?
Yes, that's right. This is exactly one of the points that I brought up with one of the guys, that Israel has the right for self-defense against Hamas missiles, and said, well, the Palestinians doesn't have an Iron Dome or shelters to hide their civilians. So it is a false equivalency to make that argument. So according to one of the leader of this protesters here. So they acknowledge the fact that the Palestinians have reacted backed into a violent situation, and the whole situation now, or the whole price, let's say, that's been paid bigly by the Palestinians, not the Israeli for this case.
Did you ask them about where foreign funding is going when it's given to Hamas, the Hamas terrorist rulers of the Gaza Strip?
Yes, of course, but the arguments here is that the vast majority of casualties are human casualties which related to Palestinian civilians, because most of these military operations took place in civilian populated areas and resulted in tens of children and women. Men has no ties to Hamas whatsoever. So this is the arguments that these people are here now trying to bring up when it comes to the Hamas-Israeli exchange of fire.
Why do you think so many Americans are emboldened to speak out on the issue, many of whom aren't directly connected to this region?
Yes, most of the people who are now gathering here are from Palestinian backgrounds or a variety of other backgrounds, not just the Palestinian for this matter. Many American activists joined these protesters, and they are now seeing this situation as a violent situation that has to come to an end. Many of the American activists, including those who's been opposing the Israeli occupation of the West Bank or the siege of Gaza, they're seeing this has to come to an end in order to solve this problem. Many of them are scared to speak up as they are feared of being called anti-Semitic or of being feared to be called supporting of Hamas terrorism. So that's why the situation is very sensitive at this point, and the focus on the outcome of this military operation and the civilian casualties.
So my final question for you, and quick answer, are you seeing the presence of any pro-Israel groups on the ground? Is there any response, and if so, what are they saying?
Well, at this spot, no, I can't spot any Israeli flags flying except the one in the Israeli embassy here, as the Palestinian protesters here is taking the streets of the surrounding street of Washington, D.C., where the embassy is located. But as we knew that there was some protesters in support of Israel happened like elsewhere, but not this area in particular.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Omar. We're going to turn back to our panel right now. So